Yes, I have this kind of bizarre background. I would say, however, that I wasn't, because sometimes I'm introduced as Gorbachev's economic advisor. I was an advisor. I wasn't the advisor, so I wouldn't take the blame. Because if there was something too big to fail, that was Soviet Union, definitely. 11 time zones, yeah, twice bigger than US and Canada combined, and completely destroyed by its own government without any external assistance even. And so when I defected to the United States, I found myself working for the second largest bureaucracy of this planet, for the federal government in Washington, D.C. Well, work for government is kind of an oxymoron, I think. I worked for the congressional think tank, U.S. Institute of Peace, which, like all congressional think tanks, didn't think at all, just period. We were tanking mostly. Yeah. And I decided to do something positive with myself, and I found a job in Wisconsin, which is even colder than Russia, and teaching young Americans ideas of liberty, ideas of founding fathers of the United States. And as the president of my college is saying that it took him a Moscow-trained economist to teach supply and demand, because all my colleagues are teaching something else, like social justice or yesterday's paper or whatever else they can find. Okay, so today we will discuss, this year is the 100th anniversary, the centenary of the dreadful revolution in Russia, which happened on the 25th of October, 1917. In Russia, however, everything has kind of a double meaning. The real time was actually November 7th, because they had different calendars and whatnot. So they began already with deceit. So why do we need to know about it? Because I think that people forget about this revolution. Now, today, New York Times has a series of articles praising this stuff. Can you imagine? Yes, I was just recently in Montclair State University in New Jersey debating I was a libertarian, there was a conservative guy from King's College, and there was a communist guy from Montclair State University, Professor Farr, very famous, because he was pointing at me again, saying that I'm not KGB, I'm a CIA, he said. I'm a CIA agent, and sent here to Montclair State University to fool us that Stalin killed a lot of people. And can you imagine? He said, and I said, well, Stalin didn't kill anyone. He said, no, he didn't, and that was a mistake. And I said, why was that a mistake? Because all the unkilled people bad-mouthed him. Can you imagine? And this guy, from 1970, he's destroying young minds in the United States, getting about $140,000 per year for his lies. It's just amazing, yes, amazing. It is crazy, yes. I can tell you that the most funny, however, was the conservative guy, who was completely imbecile. Because, for example, Professor Farr, his point was that when the United States didn't have oil, then we went to Iraq to take oil from there. And then when we ran out of drugs, so we invaded Afghanistan to get some drugs. And I asked him, why would we need some drugs? And he said, well, CIA wants to destroy minorities and progressives with drugs. Which was pretty funny. And then the conservative so-called guy, he said, I think that I said, well, I think the drugs should be sold in pharmacies or department stores, and then we will not have this violence about drugs, and will be drugs of higher quality and everything. But then the so-called conservative, he said, you know what he said? I think there is some idea that some people don't know how to handle drugs. And his idea was to if you want to have drugs, you need to do your IQ testing. And so if you have IQ below, say, 80, that means you would pay the full price for drugs. But then if you have IQ, say, above 110, then you will get a coupon, say, 75% off. and you can issue this. I just couldn't believe what I would have. And why I'm talking about that, because there was also Students for Liberty meeting there. They were doing about that. So returning back to, definitely a foundation of any free society can be based only on property rights. Property rights is mother of all rights. James Madison, our president, he made this point that there are no other human rights are possible without property rights, without property rights. It's absolutely understandable. Property rights, however, I think that the most important part of it is self-ownership. That you are a free person when you own yourself. If somebody else owns you, then you're a slave. You're a slave. And so John Locke, his point was that who owns you? Who owns you? Who owns fruits of your labor? If you do, you're a free man. If not, you're a slave. And this is as easy as that. So from my perspective, and that's why I'm considered to be kind of like a right-wing fanatic in the United States, because I don't call socialism socialism, I call it public slavery. It is a public slavery, and people are owned by government. People are owned by government. Government is telling you what to do. Government is making choices, because what is freedom? Freedom is choice. Nothing else. Freedom is choice. And then we see today our choices are being reduced and reduced in South Africa, in the United States, everywhere else. But in the Soviet Union, you didn't have any choice whatsoever. It was not part of the problem. So that's, I think, that Temba today mentioned this, that what is socialism? It is abolition of private property. No private property, people owned by their own government. Yeah, so these are I'll just show you some pictures of this awful revolution. Yeah, and there were people like Trotsky, like Lenin, mass murderers. Rudy Rummel, he's a professor of demographics in the University of Hawaii, the most famous demographer. He believes that about 200 million people were murdered by the socialist governments in the world in the 20th century. In the Soviet Union alone, the number is, which was confirmed by the KGB, 43 million people. We had a KGB boss, you remember maybe Mr. Gorbachev, that's my former boss. He had this policy of perestroika. And collateral to this perestroika was policy of glasnost. Policy of glasnost was, I'll just find, go to a little bit, yeah. This is Cuba, yeah. This is ambulance in Cuba. I'm shocked that actually a translator would even emulate the siren. Yeah, what I wanted to show you there. Yeah. So when the policy of glasnost was introduced by Gorbachev after Chernobyl, because he made a point that we were very sorry for everything, because Mr. Gorbachev, he said, I only found the truth on the 5th day, that he was not even told about what happened in Chernobyl, and he didn't know whatever. And I was speaking at the American Medical Association, and they had a conference on doctors for emergency preparedness, and so they asked me to do this Chernobyl thing, and I looked into archives already available that Mr. Gorbachev knew everything from the very beginning. He had a Politburo, they had a secret Politburo meeting 20 minutes after it happened, in the middle of the night of April 26th. And he made wonderful decision to send 700,000 troops. Can you imagine? 700,000 troops in brand new uniforms with brand new AK-47s went there to fight radiation. And And without anything, without brooms, without showers, without whatever. So that was one wonderful decision. Another wonderful decision was that Mr. Gorbachev decided that we don't have enough meat. So all the radioactive stuff was not thrown out or buried. That's what should be done, definitely. But it was mixed with good. So the standards would be pretty kind of low. Now, because I'm the last speaker, looks like, so I will maybe jump from one point to another, because there are certain things. I am too lazy to write a book about but I witnessed some very interesting episodes of history. So, for example, Mr. Gorbachev, he was sharing one of the meetings on economic reforms. He said, comrades, this is untrue, that central planning doesn't work. We have some economists who insist central planning doesn't work. No, the problem is that we never had a good plan. Can you imagine? And then you would think whether he is an idiot or what's going on. Yes. Another time today we had a nice presentation, I think, Pete mentioned Sweden, yes, and the Swedish model and everything. And I remember we had also another economist. We called him the biggest economist in the world, Abel Ganbigyan, a friend of Gorbachev. He was maybe 400 pounds, a really big economist, and even bigger than me. And so Mr. Ganbigyan, he rose and he said, I think what we need to do in Soviet Union, we need to build a Swedish model of socialism. And Gorbachev looked at him, he said, Abel, where you would get the Swedes? and that was exactly what happened. No Swedes, and it all fell apart. And so I will return back. Yeah, I can. If anyone is interested in this, send me an email. I'll email you back this presentation. Yeah. So one thing I think that many people don't understand. It just occurred to me, speaking about Chernobyl, that look, Russian eagle is double-headed as well. Way before, yeah. So that's the So kind of I have the simple. So my son right now is he's 14. He is in Washington D.C. on a conference, Turning Point. It's a sister organization to Students for Liberty, and he's 14. He has this wonderful T-shirt with Uncle Sam pointing. You know, Uncle Sam, I want you to the U.S. Army. And he has this Uncle Sam saying, I want you to stay home. That's very, very good. Yeah. So returning back to this public slavery issue, what they did, I mean, what the genius of Lenin prompted, that he realized that the only way to keep power is to kill. To kill, and to kill. And the more you kill, the better off you are, definitely. I'm working in the archives, in the Library of Congress, archives of Soviet General Dmitry Volkogonov. Volkogonov was a propaganda hitman of the Soviet Union, and anytime I would see him, I would switch the TV right away, because he was a liar. He was just unbelievable, very difficult I mean, even just to listen to him. And I didn't know, and I would never expect, that in 1980 he bought a Xerox machine in Austria, put it in the back room in his office, and was making highly illegal copies of everything going through his table. And he was commander of Soviet Institute of Military History. So he accumulated 46 boxes of secret, the most classified secret materials possible and impossible. And if they would know, if they would find it out, he would be shot on the spot. They wouldn't any kind of have any formalities with court proceedings or things like that. Yeah, so he would be, and now this is, and so when Soviet Union fell apart, he approached US ambassador in Moscow, and he said, I wanted out of Soviet Union because KGB will come back to power, and it did with Mr. Putin at the helm. And, and so he wanted to, all these 46 boxes to move to the United States. And ambassador said, oh, of course, I will put you in contact with people in the agency, that means with CIA. And he said, no agency, please, Library of Congress, and if the agency wants to read it, get a reader's card from the library and, and read it there. And I don't think CIA got any reader's card, but I did, and I am the only one, looks like, unfortunately, who is in these archives. This is enough information, enough data for 5,000 doctorate dissertations, for a lot of books, for everything. It's just amazing. Telling you what they think. For example, Lenin's handwritten memos and everything. A commissar from southern Russia is writing, dear comrade Lenin, you told us to fight religion, you didn't explain how. Lenin is writing him back, dear comrade imbecile, murder religious people, that's how, Lenin. Postscript, and murder them the way everybody would tremble with fear 150 miles around. Postscript, administer communion with lead. Can you imagine? They would have boiling lead administering communion to priests, his point is, to priests, nuns, monks, that's how. Yeah, so that's how we should fight religion, definitely. Why they were fighting religion? Religion was considered to be, well, the opium of the people. That's the Marxist definition of religion. That religion was kind of like invented to keep slaves of capitalism on the lead. And so religion was, from another hand, because I was pretty much in Soviet Union, we studied Marx. It was like a madrasa. Marxist, so we were kind of learning it almost by heart. And according to Marx, and he was absolutely right, that you cannot be a communist if you believe in God. In any God, if you believe in God, there is just no room to believe that Comrade Lenin is the greatest, or Comrade Stalin is kind of like a real God, is yes and whatnot. And so that's and all religions were exterminated. They had equal opportunity hatred towards Islam, towards Judaism, towards Christianity. Maybe Catholics were the most persecuted. Stalin's secretary, private secretary, he wrote that Stalin couldn't sleep even with his completely unbelievable, unlimited hatred towards Catholics. And why Catholics? Because his secretary said, well, who cares? I mean, there's no God, then why would you be so upset? I mean, there's no God, you know about it. So and there are some people, and his point was that, yeah, there's no God. I don't care about God. I care about the son of a bitch in Rome. Yeah, that was his point. Yeah, and so that for Catholics, definitely the Pope would be above Stalin, and he couldn't sleep nights because there is somebody pretends that he is above Mr. Stalin. So the religion was number one, definitely, and they murdered 900,000 priests and nuns and monks and other people. 900,000, that's the number again confirmed by the KGB. In 1929, they didn't have bullets already, and so Stalin decriminalized killings of so-called cleaning of social vermin, he called it. So that means that anyone could go and kill the priest and rape his wife and take whatever they have and loot the church. And the police only would say, thank you so much for cleaning the social vermin away. So that was, yeah, so that was how religion was prohibited, completely prohibited until 1942. In 1942, after 1.5 million defectors from the Soviet army to Germans, Stalin decided that he thought that he's losing the war, and only then, because a lot of these defectors were religious people, because they believed that Stalin is Antichrist, and so that's how he legalized religion. But legalized religion was religion run by the special department of the KGB was in charge of this. And if anyone is interested in that, I wrote an obituary for Alexis II, who was the patriarch of Russia. Patriarch is like Pope for Russian Orthodox. So it's all over internet, I think, right now. And I looked into his life, Alexis II. He was the colonel of the KGB. Can you imagine? He was selling his flock to KGB, kind of wholesale and retail, and did everything like that. He's wanted in the Republic of Estonia for crimes against humanity and things like that. He was the patriarch he died maybe 5-6 years ago, and then they had so-called free elections of the new patriarch, the first elections after the Tsar's time. They had 4 people who were competing with each other to be elected as the patriarch of Russian Orthodox Church. And amazingly enough, I looked into that and I have a sleeper cell in Moscow, so I called the people I know, my friends, and they admitted that all 4 are KGB agents. So you have a kind of a healthy competition inside the KGB. So these are the numbers. Say 43 million. Solzhenitsyn Foundation believes that 61 million people murdered by Soviet government. I had to tell the truth, I don't even care how many, because both numbers are completely outside of I think the human understanding of evil. And Temba today, he quoted Stalin, who used to say, death of one is a tragedy, death of a million just statistic. It's not million tragedies, just statistics, nothing else. Yeah. So anywhere from 43 million, we had this Mr. Krychkov, who was a part of this glasnost. He was the chairman of the KGB. And they put him on the spot on TV. I think Mr. Gorbachev probably ordered him there, and it was one of the callers. It was a call-in program, which was unheard of in Soviet Union before, because everything was pre-taped like several months before, then approved by 5 committees and 10 commissions, and then only shown to the public. And he was there on the kind of. He referred, because I was at the one meeting, he was there. He referred to that experience. He said, I was like naked amidst the pack of wolves. He called his experience on TV. And one person called and he said, I calculated 43 million people were murdered by your agency. And Mr. Krychkov, he said, I don't know. Why should I know? Give me some time. He said, what if exactly a week from now I'll be again on this program and tell you the true number. And so next week, it was like a hockey championship. I mean, no people in the streets. Everybody glued to TV screens to find out how many millions of skeletons you have in your cupboard. And Mr. Krychkov, he said, well, comrades, he said, the number is about right, he said. But it's preposterous to insist that all these people were killed. Most of them died of natural causes. And the moderator, nice young lady, she had enough courage. She said, well, if you don't feed people, they die of natural causes. If you don't clothe them in Siberia, they die in natural causes, and on like that. So that's exactly what happened. In other communist countries, China is a mega murderer, 78 million people. They had besides that, on the top of that, there is a grand famine. Grand famine was engineered by Chinese government from 1962 to 1964. 48 million people starved to death. Mao was laughing all the time, saying that, look, I mean, they're all cannibals. they're all cannibals. Because there was cannibalism was widespread in Ukraine, famine 1932, 1933. In China, all famines usually would result in that. But these were government-organized famines. If you have time or desire, you can watch a video called The Soviet Story. This is the most gruesome documentary about socialism produced by in the former Soviet Republic of Latvia, because KGB and Soviet Army were so afraid of Latvians, so they ran away and left all the archives and everything in Riga intact. And so they have this. This is just a great. I usually would take my students to Cuba to inoculate them against socialism, because you go to Cuba, you see this disaster, and you never can believe in this. Interestingly enough, a lot of my students, they would get enough money immediately from their parents who were hippies or who are still communists or whatever. So for many of them, it's like Hajj. It's kind of like they, and I remember I was flying to Havana, sitting next to a young woman, and she was saying, "Oh yes, my parents, they just love it, whatever. They want me to bring pictures of Fidel, of Che Guevara, of Raúl." I was kind of, I already was saying, like, you can become rich opening a shooting range, but then I caught myself, whatever, that I wouldn't. And so she looked at Cuba, whatever. I'm flying back with the same ticket. I mean, she's sitting next, and I didn't communicate with her in Cuba. And I said, "Well, how did you like it?" She said, "Never been to a place where every woman is a prostitute and every man is a thief." I thought that educational mileage was pretty good of this. Yeah, so this is speaking about Cuba, then I have a friend, Cuban. He asked me never to reveal his name because I know him since Moscow times, because they would send a lot of young people to Moscow from Cuba to brainwash them. And in most cases, brains would be washed together with water, but in his case, they were not. So he's very smart, whatever. He's up there in the government, and so he spoke to my group, and one of the students, she was under the influence of this video called Sicko. I don't know if you heard of that. Sicko by what's Michael? Yeah, who is the biggest propaganda person? and he presented that in Cuba they have a great healthcare. And so she saw this and she said, "This is such a disaster. Everything is falling apart. But we heard you have the best healthcare system in the world." He said, "Of course we do. Of course we do. But as a true communist," he said, "we need to see the room for improvement. If we would have doctors, medicines, clinics, hospitals, ambulances, it would be just perfect." And then we are walking out of the room, and he in Russian, he said, healthcare, swim to Miami. That's the only healthcare I know of." That was, yeah. So I usually use that, but then I was arrested the last time I was in Cuba. And that's why I just don't go there anymore. And the next to it is Soviet Story. So if you don't go to Cuba to inoculate your loved ones against bacilli of communism, then you can watch Soviet Story, and you can watch Soviet Story, by the way, for free on the World Wide Web, and just Google it, or it's on, I think, on YouTube and everywhere else. So this is this. Why do they kill? Why do they kill? That many people don't understand that. Why would you need to kill? Why all socialist country kills? Very simple explanation. They don't have any incentives. I mean, if you have socialism, you don't have any incentives to do anything. If, for example, if you all be paid the same, no matter what you do or don't do, then what? Then usually people stop working at all. And if you are a great leader and you want them to do what you want them to do, then you need to kill. then you need to, because you don't have positive incentives, you need to create negative incentives. And negative fear is a very powerful incentive, very powerful. And the more you kill, the more you achieve. And that was Lenin, again, in 1922, in the same archives. He's writing to Dzerzhinsky, founder of KGB, of Chekha at that time. He's saying, dear Felix, I'm telling comrades what to do. Nobody listens. I am tired of that. Let's take a couple of absent-minded comrades and shoot them publicly. And when they did, they realized the attention span increases. And then and the highest rates of economic growth in the Soviet Union was achieved from 1935 to 1939, when they were murdering people with a speed of 1,500 a day. 1,500 a day. That was this meat grinding machine was at its fastest, including my grandfather was murdered as well. So that's almost every Soviet family lost loved ones. Because it was more even than the Second World War. I mean, this mass murder. So that's why they killed. It's inevitable, inevitable. First Soviet government was the most enlightened government. Trotsky was writing poetry in French. Lenin could play piano and spoke 7 languages, and on and on like that. And that's the logic of the utopia they were trying to introduce that made them mass murderers. And Lenin was writing very openly. He was saying, from Tsars, we inherited very poor human material. So that's how he called people. Very poor human material, which can be mended only by mass shootings and forced labor. That's what his point was. And why Soviet Union collapsed? Because Mr. Gorbachev inadvertently removed fear out of the system, which was glued together only by fear. So and he was talking like a parrot. He was talking about socialism with human face, and I was thinking, what is that? And he was saying that Stalin, he perverted the image of socialism. Socialism is the most humane society. It would be a natural choice of humankind if Stalin would not make it this unpleasant and deadly. And so his point was we should return back to human face of socialism. And just to make long story short, there's a good joke of that time which illustrates this thesis of Mr. Gorbachev. And the joke is that CIA didn't know what's happening in Soviet Union, what is perestroika, what are all these reforms about. And so they found out that James Bond is retired in London, and so they hired James Bond and sent James to Moscow to find out what's happening. And James is walking with a little notebook in different stores. He goes to a butcher shop, writes there, no meat, goes to the bakery, no bread, goes to the shoe store, no shoes. And there is a KGB officer looking over his shoulder, and he said, a year ago, you would be shot for doing that. He writes there, no bullets. And when people realize that there's no bullets, then sure enough, everybody stopped working. Yeah, I mean, that you could see that. It's almost overnight, everybody stopped working. I had a secretary, Lena, a very nice young lady. And she was, once I saw she's stealing paper clips, putting paper clips into her purse. I said, Lena, why are you stealing state property in such strange form, paper clips? She said, Yuri, point to me. What else can I take in this F office? I'll take that. Nothing. And that was right. And so I remember walking home thinking that if the youngest and brightest are going to work only to steal something, that society is definitely doomed. Yeah. And so I came to that idea maybe 7 years before the CIA learned about demise of Soviet Union from Washington Post. That was, yeah, Compost. You're right. Yeah. Fake news center. We have these elections as the gift which keeps on giving. It was just amazing. The whole country. I mean, this is every day you look for what really happened. And we have all these wonderful clowns like Mr. Scaramucci. He sounds like a James Bond character. Yeah. yeah, so but returning back to them, then you need to kill. If you don't kill, you're out. And that's why North Korea is still in. They kill. Cuba is in because they kill. They understand what it is. Those who didn't are gone. Yeah. So is Mr. Gorbachev and everybody else. And so this is the problem, however, with the socialism, that it's not only kills people, it destroys those who are still alive. And destroys because for many people, slavery is attractive. Because if you are a slave, you don't need to make decisions. You don't need to make choices. Moreover, you don't have a feeling of responsibility. If you are being told, do this, don't do that, then who cares? I mean, that's the... And in Russia today, it's a widespread pandemic, I would say, alcoholism. People are going into what they call internal exile, just all the time deliriously drunk and whatnot. So these are the kind of the problems, real problems of socialism. Socialism corrupts. I am using the word socialism. I don't use the word communism because communism never existed. Some of my colleagues in American academia, most of them would say socialism is actually good, communism is bad, or fascism is bad. Yeah, but what is communism? Communism is yes, this is communism. This is from Communist Manifesto. In communist society, nobody has one exclusive. It's a paradise. The state would wither away. There will be no money. People would be working for the fun of working for others. And they would work as hard as they possibly can. And they consume as little as they possibly can. They'll be real angels. And you don't need even government. You don't need a state because people will self-govern themselves. That's what... We need to create this man, new man of tomorrow. New man of tomorrow. That's Hitler borrowed from Marx. And again, this new man of tomorrow. And that would be this communist angels. And Engels, his buddy, he asked him, when does he think this communism would be available? And Marx said, not earlier than 500 years from now. So we still are on a 300 years waiting list for that kind of wonderful thing. So it never happened. This kind of society, it's amazing that it's exactly the opposite from Adam Smith, right? Exactly the opposite. It's just amazing. So this is what. Then the third type of socialism is National Socialism. National Socialism is. I have like everything here. Oh yeah, this is. I think I showed it last time. Oh. Soviet. Russians and technology, not go very good. And what do I want to show? Yeah, this is. I don't know if you saw this. Yeah, it was a nice guy. Yes, nice guy. He had 3 kids out of wedlock. He was drinking, whatever. Yeah. Then in 1915, and then after that became a man-eater. Yeah, that's just unbelievable. Oh, this is nice. This is the most famous dictum, I think, of Hayek. Is there a greater tragedy imaginable than that in our endeavor consciously to shape our future in accordance with high ideals? We should, in fact, unwillingly produce the very opposite of what we have been striving. And this is wrong, Hayek. This is it's just because it's the last speech, so that's why. I mean, this is Selma Hayek. This is wrong. But that's not. This is. Yeah, von Mises, he talked about 2 different types of socialism. The Soviet type, Russian pattern, when everything belongs to the state. Everything is nationalized. In Soviet Union, even shoe shine stand will be run by a bureaucrat. And that was no private property, period. And so this is the Russian pattern. And the Nazi pattern would be the socialist German pattern. Preserves private property. It's more or less kind of like like we talked about that today quite a lot, that the government de facto rules you. That it's central planning with property rights, nominal property rights. But this property rights, you will have a title that in the United States we have what? Wetlands, for example. You have a title for wetlands, but you can't even camp there yourself. It's just you'll be arrested for trespassing. And so the government is telling you when to open, when to close, whom to fire, whom to hire, everything, what prices to pay, what prices to charge. So that was central planning with, and it's a fascist economy. I think most economies of the West right now are moving with a full speed to this fascist model of economic system. So this is like welfare state. We also talked about welfare state, because what is welfare state? It's a transition. That's the worst thing about that it's transition. It will inevitably lead to socialism. That's what Lenin used to say, that democracy, logically extended democracy would inevitably result in socialism. So what does this mean? That means if all of us can outvote Temba of his possessions, then many people would do that, right? Just democratically, because rich people are what? Rich people are minority, minority. So then you kind of that's the this all this awful pictures. This is Cuba. This is a store in Cuba. I took this picture myself. This store in Cuba. Everything else is on. You can buy everything else only. Oh, somewhere there is this rations. The list of what you can buy. Here is the only thing you can buy is baking soda. That's this. Without. I made a stupid joke that I said that you guys should appoint people who are in charge of baking soda in charge of everything, and and it was almost punished for that. So these are the poor Cubans. These are fixer-uppers there. Since 1959, they didn't invest anything in housing stock. Can you imagine? And this is all falling apart. This is pretty funny. It's a Chinese billionaire. He was a Marxist, raised as Marxist. And Marx and Lenin, they hated gold. All governments hate gold. Gold is, So then Lenin used to say that what we will do when we will win, we will make toilet commodes out of gold, because gold does not corrode. It's a natural metal for toilet equipment. That was his point. And this Chinese billionaire, he made this as a conversation topic. But amazingly enough, gold, he paid $2.7 million to make it. Now the price for that is $42 million. So gold is pretty paid it back very well. Yeah. So this is. So these are the mass murderers of its wars. Yeah. Grigory Zinoviev, he was the first president of Comintern. Look what he would say. To overcome we must have our own socialist militarism. We must carry along with us 90 million out of the 100 million of Soviet Russia's population. As for the rest, we have nothing to say to them. They must be annihilated. And that, well, he was annihilated in 1936 himself, yes, and Stalin was, can you imagine, Stalin killed his friends and his family first. And he had this wonderful kind of little room with a curtain, and he was laughing all the time how Zinoviev, this monster, how he was kissing the boots of the officer who was shooting at him and begging for survival. So this is just awful. They're all like this. Yeah. So if you look at Hitler, it's the same thing. Yeah. I think where is this? There's an interesting speech of Hitler. I usually would show and would say, who said that, without saying this Hitler. Yeah. And Hitler is saying like, we're socialists, all of us socialists. We believe that humans should be judged on their character, not by the productivity which is understood by capitalists only. And no, like that. So that was another socialist, and again the Soviet story will tell you the details how they worked together, because you remember maybe in 1939 both of these monsters, Stalin and Hitler, they were united in their fight against so-called fascist Poland. And they divided Poland. They took over Baltic states and whatnot. And before I think I have depressed you already enough for this wonderful Saturday. But to have something positive to say, I can tell you a little bit about, say, Baltic states. Because when Soviet Union collapsed on the glorious night of 24th of December of 1992, when it collapsed, then 15 countries emerged out of it. Collapsed also, many people don't understand why it collapsed. It collapsed because Yeltsin at that time, I had a dubious pleasure of working with him as well. And Mr. Yeltsin, he declared independence of Russia from the Soviet Union. So that was the end of, because you remember, Russia is in the middle. So it would be like if continental US would declare independence from US and say only Puerto Rico and Guam would try to stick together. So that's and so interesting. Why it's very interesting? Because 15 countries with more or less the same background, with the same history of socialist destruction, they tried to get out of the socialist slavery, finding their own ways. And sure enough, those who have chosen freedom, they are doing very well. If you look at Baltic states, in Estonia, for example, standard of living right now, $36,000 GDP per capita. In Lithuania, 28,000. Latvia, 26,000. In Russia, 8,000. In Ukraine, 4,000. And if you look at countries like Turkmenistan, 1,000. And the starting point was about 2,000 in 1990. So that was that. You can some people in the life of one generation increase their incomes by 18 times. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And these are the most. And I can, if I will just personally tell you the story of Estonia. Estonia is, I wrote several articles about Estonia with self-descriptive titles, a little country that could, or the best government in the world, and things like that. I gave a talk at the Milwaukee Business Club and was saying, you guys, if you want to invest in Costa Rica, in Thailand, don't invest in Russia. Because I never saw a person, to tell the truth, never saw a person who made an honest buck there. I saw some people who have stolen a lot. I mean, that's kind of doable. but honest buck, no. And there was one person, obnoxious person. He would stand up and would say, but you cannot ignore this market. It's a big market, 140 million people. I said, why not? Why you cannot ignore? You can ignore whatever you want to ignore. And then next morning, the phone rings. I recognize this person, his voice, and he said, I am vice president of Kikkoman Foods. You know, Kikkoman is soy sauce people, soy sauce, yes. And they have a chain of Japanese restaurants in Europe and in Asia. He called me, he said, I am the vice president of Kikkoman Foods USA. And we decided to go to Russia, and we would like to hire you as a consultant. And I said, you probably couldn't understand my accent or what, I mean, because my message was, don't go there. And he said, we think you are very level-headed, and we want you to, how much do you charge per hour? And I didn't know how much, I mean, I didn't want to scare him. I said, how about $35 per hour? And it was like a long pause. He said, can we make it 100 at least? And I said, I said, you don't know, maybe I'm a slow worker. He said, completely irrelevant. You know? and so, and at that time, and I told him, how about instead of going to Russia, let's go to Lithuania. He said, Lithuania. Can you imagine, US businessman. He said, Lithuania sounds like a cold medicine. And I said, well, how about Estonia? He said, Estonia, what is that? And I said, it's all countries, former Soviet Union. He said, oh, we hired you already. You write us a business proposal, and we will go to wherever you lead us. And so I decided to go to Estonia, and can you imagine, it's really why I'm talking about that so long, because they had the most libertarian government at that time in the world. So I decided, I called the reference table in Tallinn, and I got a phone number for Prime Minister's office. Calling Prime Minister office, and his secretary said, my English is not very good, what if I'll put you through? And so the Prime Minister picking up the phone, and I said, my name is Yuri Maltsev, I'm calling from Wisconsin. He said, great place to call from with a name like yours. Immediately he said that, yeah. I said, well, I'm representing Kikkoman Food, soy sauce company. He said, so what is that? And I said, we will bring you soy sauce. He said, you want to meet with me? I said, yeah, why not? He said, okay, why not? Yeah. And gave me a date, yeah, I still remember, 10 o'clock in the morning on August 6th. And so we're arriving there, and everybody from Kikkoman, from Tokyo, because if you're meeting with the head of government, then the whole leadership of the Kikkoman also arrived. So I'm meeting with Prime Minister. He was 32. He became Prime Minister when he was 29. And he is, and he is sitting there, whatever, and said, well, you know what? He said, when I became Prime Minister, I found out that we have $24,000 only in the treasury. And the full basement of Soviet rubles were just pictures of Lenin. And he said, so what could we do? What could we do with $24,000 for the country? So we legalized prostitution, gambling, firearms right away. Now you can buy firearms, he said, at the toy store or the gas station without showing your driver's license. And Mr. Kikkoman, Mr. Someya was president of Kikkoman. He just repeated the last sentence. He said, why without driver's license? And can you imagine, the Prime Minister, he said, pedestrians, sir, can be pissed off as well. That was, and then the most funny thing, he said, armed society is a polite society. That's a famous dictum. Armed society, polite society. And again, Mr. Sameh said, why? And he said, why? Why not? I mean, he said, if you now, for example, you came here, and look, we put some apples for you, and notebooks, and pencils, but I would be even nicer if you would come with Uzi machine guns. That was, and then Mr. Sameh, this Japanese businessman, he said, this is a stand-up Prime Minister. You know, stand-up comedian, yeah. stand-up Prime Minister. But what was great about this, that he immediately, I mean, when he legalized markets, the crime in Estonia dropped 85% in 3 weeks. All these pimps, all these dealers, whatever, they just took off, went to Russia, to Ukraine, to whatever else. Yeah. Prostitution was rampant in Estonia because they had a sex tourism from Scandinavia, from Germany. It all went into yellow pages. No people anymore. Yeah, just people. Yes, so everything went right. It was just amazing. I said, Mr. Lahr, Prime Minister, Mr. Lahr, why, if you are such a libertarian, why wouldn't you legalize drugs? He said, I wanted to, but I got phone calls from US and British ambassadors. They said, you have a Russian bear behind your back. Why would you like to spoil your relations with the West? So he said, we didn't legalize drugs, but I can reveal a well-kept state secret that we don't prosecute for drugs either. And then my Japanese clients, they said, why? Drugs are bad, one guy said. And the prime minister looked at his big blue eyes and said, really? Really? I never tried them. Yeah, never tried. And I don't know. I know some people like them very, very much. So that was, and sure enough, they had the economic growth around 9%, 10% a year. And Estonia right now became as what Mart Laar wanted to make it, a boring European country, with, and that's what it is today. The same, Latvians and Estonians and Lithuanians, they were just translating Estonian laws into their own languages, and they have something, they call it the development lag. It takes 3-4 months to translate, so. And so there's other countries, countries with very high standard of living and kind of very good. With other countries, where they say it's very difficult to do statistics. We cannot even, no, I mean, as Austrian economist, I don't trust statistics much in general, but especially it was in Soviet Union, that was pretty funny, that Laura D'Andrea Tyson, she later became Clinton's chief economic advisor. She wrote a book, I remember Minister of Labor gave me this book and he said, can you read this book and tell us what's about it? It said Comparative Economies of Eastern Europe, in which she praised Romania of Ceausescu, the country with the greatest, highest rates of economic growth. They had like 12-14%. And I, at that time, did some consulting for Comecon, which was Council for Mutual Economic Development. That's a Soviet-run kind of. We called it Council for Mutual Economic Destruction. And I worked with, there was a Romanian guy, Iona Draculescu. Everybody called him Dracula, naturally. And he was a great guy. He would smell alcohol at 8 o'clock already in the morning. And I said, Iona, how do you fake statistics? I mean, these Americans looking at your statistics, thinking you are the most successful. He said, we don't fake statistics. And I said, well, you're a friend. He said, no, we make statistics. I said, what's the difference? He said, the difference is that to fake statistics, you need statistics and you fake it. And to me, you're making it from scratch. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you look at the ceiling and then you see numbers and you take them down, go to your boss and he would correct you. That's how statistics was made. I said, well, I'm looking at the ceiling, I don't see anything. He said, well, have another drink. That was, and that was, yes. And at that time, I remember when I defected, I was debriefed by all intelligence agencies of the world, of the West. Many of them were just had no intelligence whatsoever. And then when I already was in Washington, D.C., I got a call from Dick Cheney. At that time, he was Secretary of Defense. And his secretary invited me to meet with Secretary Cheney. And so when I came to Mr. Cheney, because I had my own statistics, I tried to recalculate Soviet statistics, and I believe that Soviet economy is 6 to 7% of the US economy, and CIA believed that 65%. And so Mr. Cheney, he's sitting there with his folder, I think that was protocols of my debriefings, and he said, CIA thinks it's 65, you think it's 6 to 7. I would presume the truth is somewhere in between. I said, exactly, Mr. Secretary, it's between 6 and 7%. And his reaction was completely unexpected. He smiled ear to ear and he said, sweet, which was, and then at the end, and then he was saying, it's cosmetics, all these reforms, cosmetics. And he said, what kind of cosmetics is that? As the patient is dead and the corpse is stinking. And he said, thank you for defecting to the United States. His point was, now that's the same thing as my girlfriend would say in Washington after I will wash the dishes, so I'll do something else. But yes, it was a very interesting time, definitely. But the 100th anniversary is definitely a great reminder for us about these murders, about inevitability. I mean, look, Venezuela is unraveling today. I just was in Brazil, another victim of the same disease. It's awful what is happening. And the only, Russians cheerfully would say that the only lesson of history is that does not teach us anything. And this is the only lesson. Yes, it does not teach us anything. The Marxism is on the rise in the United States. Can you imagine that Bernie Sanders, this neo-fascist, yeah, he was proud socialist. He was all-time bragging that he had a Soviet flag, still has a Soviet flag in his office. Yeah, it was given to him. He was a mayor of a little town in Vermont, and he went to Soviet Union. They gave him the flag. Yeah, so he went on his honeymoon. He went to Soviet Union. Can you imagine his honeymoon? His wife is he is kind of Leninist and she is Maoist, and so they have vivid discussions. So we have this. We have a Pew public opinion company is telling us that 60% of American students prefer socialism to capitalism. That's the Well, Pew, I don't trust them much, Pew as well. Lenin used to say, public opinion polls are not about what people think, it's about what you should think. And I think this is true. Like every 6% for socialism, you are not, then you should, your head examine or something, yes. But it's not as bad because I'm teaching, I'm doing a lot of public speaking on campuses all over the United States. The good thing about that most students don't know what socialism is. I mean, they love it because they think socialism is some kind of smoking pot and singing kumbaya and other kind of things like this. Something touchy-feely, nice, whatever. But this is very sad in general that that half of the people in the United States were voting and whatnot. Democratic Party right now in the United States became already a socialist party. Today, I showed Temba was posting on a Facebook, governor of West Virginia, Democrat. Yeah, he switched the parties. And so I put a nice tag on this that rats are abandoning sinking ship, right? But he is a rat. I mean, no, no doubts about it. And he's enjoying. It's not I'm saying that Republicans are much better. When I defected to US, Sam Francis was a great libertarian journalist, whatnot. He invited me for lunch, and he said, Yuri, he said, you should keep in mind, we have a two-party system. And I was thinking, what he's telling me? I mean, everybody knows this. He said, we have two-party system. One party is evil and another stupid. And I said, who are you? He said, I am a stupid one. I'm Republican. I'm Republican. And this is more or less true, right? That's very, very sad. So sometimes we see, however, that fighting socialism, that socialism will not inevitably win. It was a great Austrian economist, Schumpeter, Joseph Alois Schumpeter. In 1950, he died in 1950, after he wrote a book, Communism, Capitalism, and Democracy, in which he was making a point that he is squarely for capitalism. Capitalism is freedom, everything. But socialism is inevitable, his point was. Inevitable because of democracy. Inevitable because of democracy. So I don't think it's inevitable because you can see that the zigzags, you can see all this amazing changes in South Africa with your new mayors, changes in the United States. Even in France, if you will look at Mr. Macron, I mean, 5 years ago, he would not have a chance even. He would be immediately declared a capitalist pig or something like that. And so these are kind of good changes. However, I think that these changes would not be possible without people like ourselves to fight for freedom. That's what Ludwig von Mises, he wrote a wonderful essay. If you'll have time, you can easily find it on the World Wide Web. Are we historians of decline? That's the title. Are we historians of decline? And his point is that even if we are, what choices do we have but to fight? What choice do we have that to fight? And I think that I would agree with that completely. If you have any questions or comments, then I will be happy to.
Vladimir Putin said that whoever does not miss, anybody who does not miss the Soviet Union has no heart. So that's what you grew up with, that's your childhood, etc. He also said whoever wants it back has no brain. How would you contrast that with, say, how Russia's developed since he came? The GDP per capita under him went increased almost 15 times. Still not as high as Estonia and all of that, but and went down with the recent recession and the sanctions. But despite his autocratic tendencies, his government still managed to do some pretty remarkable tricks under the hat for a country that was almost written off as completely failed in the late 1990s.
Yes, well, Mr. Putin, he's not my favorite, definitely. As I wrote when he was elected, relatively free elections of 2000, he got 73% of the popular vote. And that's the institution which murdered so many. He is a proud member of the KGB. He really is proud for his background. And so I wrote an article which was published in Russia at that time with self-descriptive title, "Meat voted for a meat grinder." and Mr. Putin is also known that if he doesn't like somebody, their life expectancy tends to drop like a rock. and so that's why, for example, I'm not, Russia is 1/6 of the world territory, so I'm exploring 5/6. I don't go back there.
The Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, there was a quote attributed to Alexander Solzhenitsyn where he said that a large portion or the majority of the Bolsheviks were not even ethnic Russians. Is that true?
It is true, yes, it is true. Well, Solzhenitsyn is being accused of anti-Semitism all the time. He wrote a book called 200 Years Together, History of Jews in Russia. And if you will look at first Soviet government, then there was only one non-Jew there in the government, and it was Joseph Stalin. And everybody else was, I mean, Lenin, Jewish, Trotsky is real, Lenin's name, Blum, Trotsky was Bronstein, then Zinoviev was Rosenfeld, and then all of them were like that. Well, for what reason? Because Jews were discriminated against under Tsars. Jews had something called the settlement lines, which would be 100 miles from big cities. They could not. And so that Jews were the first to embrace Marxism. They had a socialist party, a Jewish socialist party. It's called Bund. Bund means people, and so they were the heart of the Communist Party, of the Lenin's party, Social Democratic Party. They disbanded Bund, and then they started this Social Democratic Party, and so all of them. Then Stalin was the only, and Stalin became anti-Semite himself. And say in 1939, he already was saying that it's time to clean the synagogue. And he meant the whole Soviet government as a synagogue. And he was murdering a lot of people like Zinoviev and Kamenev and Bukharin and whatnot, who happened also to be Jewish. And then Stalin's idea was that's why he supported Foundation of Israel, that all the Jews would move there, his point was. However, then he realized that that's not a good idea, and so he started the Jewish Autonomous Republic in the Far East, a completely unlivable place, so he would dump all the Jewish population there, and they would die. Well, the Jews were lucky, Soviet Jews were lucky that Stalin died in the middle of this dream. But already 56,000 were sent there to this Siberia, to this Birobidzhan, it's called, the place. And then also they had trials of Jewish cosmopolitans, they called them, and the Jewish doctors were accused of killing Russians by vaccinations and things like that. So that was so that was pretty. But if you will look at it's for Jews, it's kind of no-win kind of thing, because they either are accused that they brought this plague upon the country. However, now they are accused of being imperial, pro-American, pro-whatever. Most Jews that I know of left. I mean, it's only I think only dyslexics are still there. That's because they have opportunity to. I mean, Israel is happy to take them. U.S. is happy to take them. So that's them. Any other questions? Or well, I would like to thank you so much for your kind attention and.